parents didn't invite me to Christmas party because of my selfish sister, but when I told how much money I spent on gifts, they changed their minds and invited me to New Year's. I'd saved for months and spent over $3,000 on gifts, carefully picking out something for everyone. My parents got a fancy new espresso machine they'd been eyeing. My sister and her husband got a weekend getaway package to a mountain resort, and I even threw in a custom set of golf clubs for my dad. Everything was wrapped, labeled, and neatly stacked in my small rented apartment. I had even marked the date on my calendar, December 24th, dinner at my parents' house, like every year. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed. On the morning of the 23rd, I woke up to a text message from my mom. It wasn't long or overly emotional, just a flat, gut-wrenching message that said, "Don't come to Christmas. We are disappointed in you." I must have read it a dozen times, trying to figure out what it meant. Disappointed? In what? I hadn't done anything. At least nothing I could think of. I called my mom right away, but she didn't answer. I tried my dad. Same thing. Then I texted my sister, but she just replied that she didn't want to get involved. I was completely blindsided. What could I have done to deserve this? I racked my brain for hours, replaying the last few months in my head, trying to figure out where I might have screwed up. But nothing stood out. In the evening I was angry. I'd wasted the whole day trying to figure it out, calling, texting, begging for some kind of explanation. It felt like yelling into a void. Finally I gave up. I ordered a greasy pizza, cracked open a cheap beer, and spent Christmas Eve alone in my apartment, staring at the pile of presents I'd carefully chosen for people who didn't even want me around. But then something snapped. I wasn't just angry, I was hurt. I didn't deserve this treatment, especially after all I'd done to make the holidays special. If they didn't want me there, fine. But I wasn't just going to sit there quietly and let them brush me off like that. The next day, I sent a single text message to the family group chat. It wasn't much, just a simple question. What should I do with the gifts? I spent over $3,000 on them. I wasn't expecting much of a response. But less than 5 minutes later my phone rang. It was my mom. I let the phone ring a few times before I picked it up. I wasn't in the mood for whatever excuse they were going to throw at me, but curiosity got the better of me. My mom's voice sounded overly cheerful, as if nothing had happened. She jumped right in, saying something about a misunderstanding and that they were just overwhelmed with planning. Then she dropped the bombshell. They wanted me to come over for New Year's instead. I didn't buy it. The whole thing felt forced, like they were trying to patch up the mess they'd made. Still, I played along. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. Later, my father called with the same fake enthusiasm. He went on about how they'd love for me to spend New Year's with them, and how it would be a fresh start for everyone. He didn't even mention Christmas or the fact that they had shut me out without explanation. I wasn't stupid. I knew they must have seen my text about the gifts and realized they'd overplayed their hand. But I didn't argue. If they wanted to pretend everything was fine, I could do the same for now. So I agreed. I told them I was coming for New Year's, and they acted like it was the best news they'd ever heard. But in the back of my mind, I was still angry. Whatever had happened, whatever they'd decided about me over Christmas, wasn't just going to disappear because they suddenly needed me around. Over the next few days, I debated whether I should go at all. Part of me wanted to tell them to shove it and keep the presents for myself. But I'd already spent the money, and I figured showing up would at least give me a chance to find out what the hell was going on. New Year's Eve arrived, and I packed the presents into my car. As I drove to my parents' house, I replayed everything in my head. The text, the silence, the sudden invitation, it all felt wrong. As I pulled into their driveway, I was determined to keep my guard up. The first thing I noticed was the car. A shiny new SUV parked in the driveway, practically glowing under the streetlights. I'd never seen it before, and it definitely wasn't my parents'. But I didn't think much of it. I grabbed the bags of presents and headed inside, bracing myself for whatever awkward reunion was in store. To my surprise, everyone acted as if nothing had happened. My mom hugged me at the door, my dad patted me on the back, and my sister and her husband greeted me like it was any other holiday. The tension I was expecting wasn't there, or at least they all pretended it wasn't. Dinner was fine, if a little stiff. We made small talk, caught up on the usual family stuff, and finally got around to the presents. I handed out everything I'd bought, and watched their faces light up as they unwrapped the expensive surprises. My parents loved the espresso machine, my sister and her husband loved the trip, and for a moment I almost forgot about the whole Christmas fiasco. But then, as we were cleaning up, I couldn't help but ask about the SUV. I mentioned it in passing, thinking they'd tell me it was something they bought or leased. But it wasn't. My sister grinned and said it was her Christmas present from my parents. And just like that, everything clicked. I stared at my sister, waiting for her to say she was joking. But she wasn't. She started to gush about how surprised she was when my parents gave her the keys, how much she loved the car, and how generous they were to get her something so amazing. I couldn't believe it. My parents had bought her a brand new SUV for Christmas, a gift worth tens of thousands of dollars, and I hadn't even been invited to the holiday. I looked over at my parents. They were silent, avoiding eye contact. That's when my sister, in her usual tone of clueless entitlement, dropped the bombshell. She said she had asked our parents not to invite me for Christmas because she didn't want me to feel bad about not getting a gift as big as hers. She even said it like she was doing me a favor. As if excluding me from the family celebration was somehow an act of kindness. I couldn't hold back anymore. I asked my parents if this was true, and they tried to play it off, saying they didn't want any drama or jealousy to ruin the holiday. My dad mumbled something about how they thought it was better this way, while my mom said they'd planned to make it up to me at New Year's. I was stunned. They hadn't even considered how it would make me feel to be left out like this. It wasn't the car, it was the fact that they were willing to sacrifice their relationship with me to avoid an imaginary confrontation. For a few minutes I just sat there and let it sink in. My sister was still talking, oblivious to the fact that every word that came out of her mouth made it worse. She went on and on about how she deserved the car because she'd had a rough year, and how she knew I'd understand. Understand? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them all exactly how I felt. How angry I was that they had treated me like an afterthought. How hurt I was that they hadn't even bothered to explain themselves until I brought up the money I had spent. I reminded them of everything I'd done to make the holidays special, year after year, and how this was the thanks I got. My parents began to stammer out apologies, but it was too late. The damage was done. My sister rolled her eyes like I was being overly dramatic and said something about letting it go. That was the last straw. I got up, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. But as I passed the kitchen, I noticed a heavy decorative rock that my mother kept on the counter. Without thinking, I picked it up, went outside, and threw it straight at the windshield of my sister's new car. The glass shattered with a loud crack, and for a moment everything was quiet. Then I heard screaming behind me, my parents, my sister, all of them screaming my name. I didn't wait. I got in my car and drove away, leaving them standing in the driveway. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I couldn't bring myself to care. They treated me like garbage, and for once I wanted them to feel a fraction of what I'd felt. So I spent my New Year's Eve alone in my apartment again, but this time I wasn't sad. I was angry, yes, but also relieved. For once, I'd stood up for myself, and it felt strangely good. The next morning my phone exploded with calls and messages. My parents, my sister, even her husband, they all wanted to talk. I ignored most of them, letting the voicemails pile up while I scrolled aimlessly through social media, trying to decompress from the chaos. Finally, I gave in and listened to one of the messages from my dad. He sounded angry, saying that I'd crossed the line and that I needed to come back and pay for the damage immediately. My mom's messages were a mix of guilt and pleading, saying I'd ruined the holiday, and demanding that I make things right. I wasn't surprised by her reaction, but it was my sister's message that really pushed me over the edge. She was furious, calling me selfish and childish and accusing me of trying to ruin her happiness out of jealousy. She even threatened to call the police if I didn't come back and fix the car. It was ironic, really. The same family that had cut me out of Christmas to avoid upsetting me was now falling apart over a broken windshield. I wasn't going to back down, though. I sent a single reply to the family's group chat, telling them that I would pay for the windshield, but that I wasn't going to apologize. I made it clear that I was done being treated like a second-class family member, and if they wanted to cut ties over it, that was their choice. The next few days were quiet. I wired the money to cover the cost of the windshield repair, sent them the receipt, and heard nothing back. It was strange, almost eerie, not having them bombard me with calls and texts. But I figured they were either too mad to respond or trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Then, out of nowhere, my sister's husband called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. To my surprise, he wasn't angry. In fact, he sounded almost apologetic. He admitted that he thought the whole Christmas situation was messed up, but he didn't want to cause a conflict with my sister or my parents. He said he tried to convince them to invite me, but they wouldn't budge. When he saw what happened on New Year's Eve, he realized how unfair the whole thing had been. It was the first time anyone in the family had admitted how wrong they had been. We talked for a while and he told me that he didn't blame me for what I had done, even though it was extreme. He said he understood why I was angry, and in a way he respected me for standing up for myself. It was a strange conversation, but it felt good to have someone on my side for once. After that, things started to change. My parents and sister were still frosty, but the tension wasn't as intense. They weren't trying to force an apology out of me, and I wasn't pushing them to admit they were wrong. It was like an unspoken truce, fragile but better than open hostility. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same. And frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted them to. About a week later, I got an email from someone I didn't expect: my mom's sister, Aunt Karen. She wasn't someone I kept in close contact with, but we got along well when we saw each other at family gatherings. Her email started out casually, but it quickly became clear that she wasn't just writing to say hello. She said she'd heard about what happened over the holidays, and wanted me to know I wasn't crazy for being upset. Apparently, she'd been in a similar situation with my mom when they were younger, where my grandparents played favorites, and she was always the one left out. What really shocked me was what she told me next. She said she'd found out about the SUV months before Christmas. My parents had been planning to buy it for my sister for a while, but there was more to it than that. Karen claimed that my sister had specifically asked for the car, saying that she deserved it after all the hard work she'd put into taking care of her family. But Karen insinuated that this hard work was just my sister guilting my parents and complaining about her so-called struggles, even though her husband was making a lot of money. She also mentioned something that made my blood boil. My sister had apparently said, "I don't want to deal with my name making a scene when he realizes he's not getting anything this big." That was it. That's why they excluded me from Christmas. Not to spare my feelings, but because my sister had manipulated them into thinking I'd ruin their holiday. Aunt Karen said she didn't think it was right and wanted me to know the whole story. She also told me that if I ever needed someone to talk to, I could come to her. The email hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't sure how to feel. On the one hand, I was angry at my sister for how self-centered and manipulative she'd been. On the other hand, I felt vindicated, knowing that I wasn't imagining things or overreacting. I decided to call Aunt Karen, and we ended up talking for hours. She told me more stories about the dynamic between her and my mother, how my mother always had a blind spot when it came to my sister, and how she'd warned my parents about playing favorites. By the end of the conversation, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't alone. There were cracks in the family dynamic that I hadn't seen before, and now that I was aware of them, I couldn't ignore them. It didn't fix everything, but it gave me some clarity. I decided to stay away from my parents and my sister for a while. Not as punishment, but for my own sanity. If they wanted to make up, they'd have to meet me halfway. And Aunt Karen? Well, she turned out to be an unexpected ally. She even invited me over for dinner the next weekend, saying it was about time someone in the family treated me like I mattered. It wasn't the ending I had in mind for the holidays, but in a strange way, it felt like a new beginning. After the chaos of New Year's, I decided to stop chasing a relationship with my parents and sister. They made it painfully clear where I stood in their priorities, and frankly, I was tired. Tired of being the one who tried, the one who gave more than I got. Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance. The family group chat was eerily quiet, and I didn't hear much from them unless, of course, they needed something. My mom texted me to ask if I could help her with her laptop problems, and my sister wanted advice on changing her car insurance. Each interaction felt transactional, like I was a service they expected to be available whenever it suited them. I began to see a pattern. They didn't want me involved in their lives unless they had something to gain from me. This realization hit me hard, but it also gave me a sense of clarity. I didn't owe them anything, not my time, not my energy, not my presence. In February, Aunt Karen called me out of the blue. We'd grown closer since her email, meeting regularly and talking more often. She'd become a surprisingly steady presence in my life, someone I could count on when everything else felt unstable. During the call, she casually mentioned that my dad had had a birthday party the week before. I froze. I hadn't even known that had happened. When I asked if I'd been invited, Karen hesitated before telling me the truth. My dad hadn't invited me. She said she asked him why, and his excuse was that he didn't think I wanted to come. He hadn't even tried to contact me. It stung to hear that, but I wasn't surprised. That was who they were: avoiding conflict, avoiding effort. It was easier for them to write me off than to face what they'd done. Karen, as usual, tried to cheer me up. She told me she had made it clear to my parents how unfair their behavior was, but I could tell she didn't expect it to change anything. She also said something that stayed with me. Sometimes family isn't worth the fight. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I had always believed that family should be there for you no matter what, but my parents and my sister had shown me that wasn't always the case. Maybe Karen was right. Maybe I had to stop fighting for something that wasn't there. Over the next few months, I began to let go. I stopped checking on my parents, stopped trying to make plans with them. When they did reach out, I kept the conversations polite but distant. My sister barely wrote at all, which was honestly a relief. Instead, I put my energy into my own life. I started going to the gym regularly, something I'd always put off, and even joined a local hiking group. I made some new friends through work and started going out more. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself instead of trying to live up to someone else's expectations. Karen became an even bigger part of my life. She regularly invited me over for dinner, and we started a little tradition of cooking together. She was full of stories about her youth, her career, and how she'd rebuilt her life after going through something similar with my mother. One night, after a long conversation over wine, Karen said something that really hit home. "You know, you're worth so much more than how they treated you. Don't let them make you feel small." It was such a simple thing to say, but it stayed with me. By spring, I'd fully embraced the idea of moving forward. I even started looking into buying my own place, something I'd always dreamed of, but never seriously pursued. Karen offered to help me with the process, and it felt good to have someone in my corner. I still hear from my family occasionally, but it's always the same pattern. My mom or sister will text when they need something, and I'll respond with a quick reply or a polite no. My dad hasn't contacted me at all since his birthday. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I don't hate them. I don't even hold a grudge anymore. But I've accepted that they're never going to be the family that I want or need. And that's okay, because I'm finally learning to put myself first. Karen likes to joke that I've adopted them as my real family. And in a way, she's right. She's shown me what it means to be supported, to be valued, to be loved unconditionally. Looking back, I don't regret standing up for myself that night. It wasn't the most mature way to handle things, but it was the wake-up call I needed to start living my life differently. Now I'm building something better, something that doesn't rely on people who see me as an afterthought. I feel free for the first time in a long time.